There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the Media Mothership.
All right, welcome to Media Mothership, broadcasting out of Edge Radio Studios here in Nipaluna, Hobart, Tasmania. On this show, we explore how media can shape our understanding of the world around us. We're streaming on edgeradio.org.au, as well as on YouTube and Twitch. You can message us on the chat on Twitch and SMS us directly in the studio on 0488 11707. I'm your host, Craig Norris, and I'm joined by guest, Dr. Emerald King, Humanities.
I'm just putting it on Instagram. I'm uploading my socials.
Wow. There we go. I'm looking for a sudden influx of metrics hitting my channel.
It's not going to happen. Sorry.
So you are a humanities lecturer at the University of Tasmania and an award-winning cosplayer. What's the latest award? There's the latest one, right? Like from last year?
No. So the latest and possibly the biggest was winning World Cosplay Summit Australia at Smash in 2023.
The Cosplay
and then
Summit in Australia.
And
Smash. That's the Sydney one.
This is the Sydney manga anime show. It's the SH is for show, and I always forget that. Yeah.
Because, you get to the S and you go show, and then H. What's H? No, it's
Sydney manga anime show. And then in August, my cosplay partner, Amy, and I did a lot of media, did a lot of going to the World Cosplay Olympics style media because, of course, Paris was happening at the same time.
And this was the Akira?
This was the cosplay? Akira, yes. We went to Japan in the middle of Nagoya, in the middle of the 38 plus degree heat, 90% humidity plus. Our performance costumes, we were in t-shirts and jeans doing Akira. So I was Kaneda, I made a bike, the whole thing.
Bike?
Yeah, we did the Kaneda bike slide.
See, we're jumping ahead a bit. There's so much about that, which is kind of the fascination I have with, performing as a character in a fictional text. So in this case, the classic Japanese anime from, was it 89?
89.
Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo.
Mm-hmm.
And two main characters that you guys went as. And what I was thinking very low tech. I'll get around to asking you about, how tips for travel overseas. Thinking, okay, well, it's kind of like, clothing. But you've just mentioned the bike that they had.
The bike.
How did you? I've got to ask right now before I forget.
Yep.
Kaneda's bike is so.
Kaneda's bike is canonically 3 meters long.
So that's...
Ask me how I know it's canonically 3 meters long.
Yeah, how do you know?
Ask me how I know.
Because it's... Yeah, is there any data on that?
Yes, there's so much data.
So much.
There is a data book just on the bike. Like, you know how in, up until the 90s, you'd buy a car and then there'd be a manual for it?
Yes.
I can't
Toyota
drive.
Corolla
I'm driven in life, but I come from a family of insane engine heads.
Wow.
But yeah, so there is full specs for the bike. People have made the bike full specs so that it works roadworthy.
Wow.
There are various versions of it. There's a really cool series that a Japanese maker made of creating the fiberglass shell to make a roadworthy bike. But people have done it in the States. People have done it in Japan. They've made legal versions of the Kaneda bike.
Because it's such a futuristic design.
It is incredibly iconic, though, that the whole moment of the bike, it happens at the beginning of the film. It's the opening shots. It's the love letter to Neo-Tokyo. It's that really hypnotic use of gamelan and really earthy, psychedelic, futuristic music. You're taken through the streets of futuristic Tokyo, July 2019. in futuristic Tokyo.
That's right. It was the idea of the future from 89.
From the manga, so it's 83.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because each version changes that date,
Yep.
right? The manga, because it was published earlier.
I think it depends on the translation.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it depends on the translation. But yeah, so the bike is a vehicle for setting up the world, and then there's this moment where Kaneda does a screech with the bike, and it's actually to set up an even cooler moment where he takes out a member of the opposing gang who is an obese clown. No hyperbole there. The character is an obese clown on a motorcycle.
This is classic kind of
yep.
cyberpunk.
And this bike swerve, it is a meme. It's showing up in everything. There's a version by Akira. There's a version in Cyber. You can ride the bike. You can download the bike in most versions of Cyberpunk.
The video game.
The video game.
That was released with Keanu Reeves
Yeah.
As their kind of celebrity
Yep.
cameo.
And I don't want to mention
Right.
Ready Player One, but it's in Ready Player One.
So it's a real touchstone, iconic.
And it's something that people
part of
keep on
this.
coming back to. So yeah. So how do I know the bike is 3 meters? Because all the stats have been publicized.
Yeah.
And
But you did one.
I did. I've done
How did
3.
you one? Okay, so you're cosplaying as the character,
Yep.
and then you're in Nagoya, and then you
Yep.
drop the bombshell and the bike.
Yep.
So was the bike there?
No, so we had we each had 2 pieces of luggage. So Amy
Yep.
had
So you get your Qantas ticket, and you say,
Yep.
okay, I'll buy a
JAL,
JAL.
sponsored by JAL and Smash. Thank you very much.
Let's get those representatives out. Thank you for that. So you could get 2, and you're thinking it as a cosplayer. You're not
Yep.
thinking as I'm going on holiday,
No.
and I need clothes, and I need some stuff. You're thinking, okay, to get all my cosplay in, I'm going to need
Yep.
this. So
Yep.
okay, so how did you logisticize this?
The first thing that we did is we emailed Mr. JAL and asked for more luggage.
Right. Because, I mean, people do this, right? They would do surfing holidays, right?
Yep.
They need to get their surfboard
You need
over there.
And JAL was really great immediately.
Did you say it was cosplay?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So
did you-
JAL sponsors it.
Right. Because they were one of the sponsors.
They're one of the sponsors. They give out the big novelty check.
But it's one thing to be a sponsor, and it's another thing when you're on the phone talking with someone at the other end thinking, do they know what cosplay is? Do they know what this object is I'm
They're
describing?
pretty invested.
You found it was...
So last year at Smash, year before. No, it was last year. Because foolishly, we went to we won in 2023 at Smash. We went to 2024 and judged our successors, who are a great duo from Queensland, and one of them is part of the AMU's Idol group. But then 3 days, and so we finished Smash. I came back here to teach the first lecture of semester 2,
Well, yeah,
and then we
back
got
to
on a
that.
plane to go to Japan.
Live life richly.
Don't do that.
Live it to the max.
But yeah, so we had we managed to get extra luggage. JAL had this promotion where if you scanned a QR code at Smash, then you could get extra luggage.
And that was targeting cosplayers.
That was targeting,
right? Or was it-
targeting just people
Right,
who were
I'm
at
gonna-
Smash who like Japan.
Yeah, because I
Really
need
great
an
promo.
extra suitcase to bring back all my merch
Yep.
from Japan.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
vibe.
pretty much. That I mean, I think it's definitely aimed at the people who go to Japan with empty suitcases,
Yeah.
and then buy an extra suitcase because they
Cargo.
shop too much. I think Amy had all of her mundane clothes in her sister's luggage. She had a
Wow.
box because we did the characters of Canada and Tetsuo, and we just did the highlights reel, which is them. They have 2 confrontations. So we did the bike swerve for fan service. Then we combined these two.
I still can't visualize
confrontations.
you've got the bike there.
I'm getting there. And then we finished off with the final mutation. So
Wow. So when Tetsuo mutates?
Mutates, yeah.
That scene.
Yep. So Amy had 3 different arms. So there was the metal arm, there was a small mutant arm, and then there was a giant mutant arm that we
kidding.
put in a box. So that had its own box.
What material? I mean, was that like a inflatable material? Was it like a pool
Inflatables are
noodle,
really
swing
interesting,
noodle?
but it was a whole heap of pool noodles under all different fabrics. So we wanted it to be really shiny for the stage. And there are rules about gore and about making a mess of the stage for other people who come on. And so we had lots of sequins and lycra and lots of skin tone things. Then we went up to the Hobart Tip Shop and got lots of...
Hobart Tip Shop, call
Hobart
out.
Tip Shop. You know it's coming. If I'm talking about cosplay, I'm talking about the Hobart Tip Shop. Lots of wires, and we used washing machine hoses. And then Amy learnt electronics and circuiting, and she actually programmed in little movable servos, so the skin actually crawled and moved and is absolutely disgusting. There's an amazing textile artist who I have on Instagram, so I should be able to find her name, but she does these beautiful, incredible kinetic dresses. Her name is Lisa Jiang. And she does these incredible like silk dresses, and then they all move and kind of mutate over the body.
Right.
So we were really inspired by that because it is Uncanny Valley. These beautiful garments, and they just kind of quiver and move by themselves, and yeah, stunning, but also really, really gross. So that was the arm.
Yes. Gosh. Okay.
So that was Amy's luggage. My luggage, I had all of our event costumes. I had my Canada bike suit, and then I had a suitcase that was just the rest of the stage props. So we had an Olympic throne because not only was the Paris Olympics happening at the same time, but Akira is set before the 2020 Tokyo Olympics.
Right, yeah. It's a real ground zero.
And that's the main reason. So this is the second time that we've done this skit. We did an earlier version in 2019 and came second. And 2019 was it was just when Tokyo had been announced. So we knew that it was coming.
Perfect.
So yeah, we predicted the COVID pandemic with our Akira skit in mid-2019.
See, that's an omen. You should have.
We should never have done it.
Been realizing the forces you were tampering with.
We caused COVID.
What is the line from Jurassic Park? You were so keen to see if you could. You never asked if you should.
If we should, yeah.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's remarkable to see it in person, but then the whole logistics in the background going up to it. There's a meme I was reading on a Reddit post, which was, it was this photo of just before you go through security at an airport, and it must have been on some cosplay subreddit, and it was a photo of one of the bins, and there were 4 fantastic looking samurai swords like in their scabbards that had just been put in the bin, and the comment was something like the point of last regret, or something where you obviously in this case as a cosplayer you've packed cosplay equipment including a sword. That's for your cosplay, and then of course you've hit a security checkpoint.
That used to be traveling between here and mainland cons for me.
There must be horror stories of having to get rid of a cosplay object.
There's about 10 years of me going backwards and forwards.
What have you lost?
I've lost a Super Sailor Mars fire bow.
So this is like a bow, an archery bow.
It was made out of cardboard, an archery bow that looked like it was in flames. I only had carry-on.
What was the discussion there? Like you had it in your check-in luggage?
No, I only had carry-on. So on the way up, I had my costume with a bag, and then I had the bow in pieces wrapped up in birthday paper, and it was fine going up.
So this was from Hobart.
This is from Hobart to Melbourne. I flew up on a 6 a.m. flight to go to Melbourne Mini Animania in 2009. We did a skit based on Doctor Who.
Oh wow!
We won Best Skit.
And this was like a cross-play Sailor Moon meets Doctor Who thing.
No. We had this theory that Sailor Pluto, if she's a time guardian, that makes her a time lord. So it was
canonical.
Yeah, we took the Time Lord mythos and we turned it into a Sailor Moon.
That's fantastic.
Lore. Won a prize. But yeah, coming back, I had this bow, and
was it still in the birthday?
No. By that stage, the wrapping had gone, and I was walking through, holding it, and somebody is like, "Well, you've got to check it because there's wire in it." And I'm like,
And there was wire, right?
Well,
That's
it was wire like supporting the structure,
Oh,
but everything was sealed. There's no way that it could come out. This is back in the day when if you were going into Melbourne, you had like the real bottleneck of scanning before you got to the lounges. So I'm walking through, and they're like, "Well, you've got to check it. It'll be hundreds of dollars." And I'm like, "I'm not paying for checked luggage for a piece of cardboard."
Right, yeah, because you hadn't paid already for checked luggage,
No.
and that's where they get you at the airport.
And so I'm
right?
like, here, like you just put it in the bin. And I was
Really?
over it completely. It was like, just put it in the bin.
Right.
Yeah.
You were, so it sounded like you were in a mentally healthy space, though. You could
but like,
let go of it.
It's got to the point where at that stage, I made an Emeraldus
Wow, so
gravity
Captain
saber.
Harlock,
Captain
Emeraldus.
Harlock, gravity saber. That never made it home. That got binned because it couldn't. It looked like a gun. It looked like a sword gun. So that didn't come home, but it was fine going up. What else have I lost? There's
How did you feel? I mean, and that would have been like the first time would have been devastating. That kind of like all those hours sunk into creating this object, and this was the one that you had exhibited here at University of Tasmania in the library.
Yeah.
So it had a, I guess it did have a public performance and engagement.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah, she lives on. If I was still the same size as I was many years ago, like the costume's still completely wearable. It hasn't degraded in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, I mean, at that stage, I still do. I make a lot of my props out of cardboard because, particularly in the late 2000s. Before you could get thermoplastic down here, before people had discovered closed-cell EVA foam and everybody started using that, cardboard. Like, I think my gravity saber was made out of pizza boxes.
Yeah, and it presents strongly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
this thing was beautiful. Like, I can do a lot with cardboard. And in fact, there's actually been a bit of a resurgence in using cardboard for, particularly in remote areas away from Europe and North America, where it's much easier to get materials. So I'm a big voice about using trash and recyclable things.
Yes.
So we've made a costume out of 20 meters of Thai silk that came from the tip shop. I'm talking about making props out of pizza boxes, and then you've got people like Spicy Thai, Sanat, from Weta Workshop in New Zealand. So you will have seen his work in things like the Power Rangers movie and Thor Love and Thunder. And,
wow.
An incredible guy. We just met hanging out in Wellington as dirty little cosplayers. And then he got a job at Weta and he's still there 10 years later. But yeah, so he's just recently rediscovered cardboard and how... like the joy of taking a waste product and making it really cool. So he made a full King of Angmar set of armor from the Lord of the Rings out of material and cardboard, which is incredible. And he's taken it to events in like Basel in Europe. And it's just cardboard.
That must be so inspiring to see. Do you come across these on YouTube? Are there easy exchanges of information, or is this like you're part of a particular forum?
I mean, Sanat just publishes stuff on Instagram. He's got a fairly large following. Yep. He did message me the other day saying, I'm going to try out TikTok. So he wants to grow his following. But he guests around. He was at HoloMat in the States at the end of last year. He's a regular guest at Fantasy Basel in Europe. And he's a professional cosplayer in the sense that he works at Weta and makes costumes.
Yes.
In New Zealand. So
that's a fascinating pathway of professionalization.
Yeah. And particularly in New Zealand, in Australia, we've never really had rules about pro cosplay and what that means. But the competitions in New Zealand have always had a prohibition on professional costumiers, on people who work at Weta from entering those kind of competitions, which, I mean, when you're in Wellington, it makes a lot of sense because, there was one time that, there's a joke based from the original filming of the Lord of the Rings days, that if you were over 6 foot and svelte, you would get kidnapped to become an elf extra.
Because yes. So your background is you worked in New Zealand at the University of
Victoria University of Wellington. So I went over there. That was my first job. When I finished my PhD at UTAS, there were 3 positions advertised in the entire world for a Japanese literature specialist. And Vic Uni wanted a Japanese literary person, so they took me. But I mean, I say this, and I think I was having a conversation with our PhDs here at UTAS, and how varied the PhD path has become. So I have been in the game. I'm officially clocked into mid-career, Craig. I'm officially mid-career. Dead. But, I was only on the job market for 6 months, which nobody's only on the job market for 6 months. It's impossible. It's ridiculous. And I know of other scholars who I think their Japanese is much better, or their native speakers, or their writing is so much better than mine. And, they've been on the market for years, but I just happened to have a very niche specialty of Japanese literature. And there was a job, and I got it, and I was in Wellington for 5 years. I came back here as a visiting scholar for a bit. Got invited to events and conferences in Hong Kong, at the Comics Museum there. But yeah, I was mostly just in Wellington at the time when they were finishing pickups for The Hobbit, which was really cool.
Yes, so that's because it's New Zealand is a space that we have ideas of its media fantasy making environment, but you were there for a while, so it provides a certain insight into what that cultural difference is between Australia and New Zealand. Because in particular, I'd love to dig into this kind of what the experience of cosplay is from your perspective in Australia and New Zealand. Given that, I guess the one of the reasons to bring you in is that you're about to head off to the Wellington Cosplay Photo Festival in New Zealand. And as you're saying, there are differences between the Australian and New Zealand space. I mean, I think one thing that, particularly in Anglophone cosplay studies, and I would like to call myself an expert in Anglophone cosplay studies, both as somebody who does it and somebody who critiques it, is that a lot of the time it's very much a US English voice, and there's an assumption that all cosplay is the same. But it's not. There are very much regional differences. I was really surprised by how much of a difference there is between cosplay in Australia and cosplay in New Zealand, even though we have a history of international competitions. So Armageddon, before the Christchurch earthquake, they used to host events in Australia as well as in New Zealand. Now they only host events in New Zealand. Armageddon is arguably the biggest event in New Zealand. It started off as a trading card event, and now it's a popular culture event for all things. Yeah. Look, and there must be a lot of envy from the Australian side towards the cultural trajectory New Zealand's on in terms of, I guess in the popular imagination, Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings, since that cultural zeitgeist moment. Yes and no, because you've got to think of all of the Marvel films that are filmed in Australia. Look, they are, but they don't seem to have the same. Well, yeah, they don't have the flavour that Lord of the Rings and Xena. I mean, Mad Max is and Crocodile Dundee. If we're thinking of Australian soft power that has a tangent to this. I would argue that even now Priscilla has more. Although, totally, I'd put Priscilla in there as well. Yeah, you're exactly right. But again, the Marvel stuff, and same with the Matrix stuff that was filmed here. It doesn't have the flavour. It's the equivalent of using Toronto to dupe. New York. So it's one of the things about New Zealand Lord of the Rings that works. And they capitalised on it, and they still capitalise on it. So far too many years later. For God, it's good. 21 years. Yeah. It does mean, though, for cosplay and the sense of a professional community, as you're saying, it comes up in interesting ways. Whereas in Australia, you're saying that it's not like an Olympic space where you can't be a professional to be at the Olympics, right? That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
in New Zealand, that
there's
distinction is...
that distinction's always been made. So
Why is that?
I think it is the presence of industry.
I mean, as we're saying, though, there's a film industry here, but it doesn't have that conversation with.
It's only really in Brisbane. It's not as widespread. It's not
because that's where the Marvel stuff is.
But I think
Bris Vegas,
Disneyland. I was expecting it to be much similar, and admittedly, this is a perspective that is now a decade out of date. But when I first went to New Zealand, I was struck by, in Australia, we've always had a real performance culture and a real skit culture. That's not the same now because competitions have changed, and the only real performance competition that either country has is the World Cosplay Summit. There has been attempts to bring it back. So at the beginning of last year, we had the first round of the ECG in Australia.
ECG. Well, so all right. World Cosplay Competition is the big global one.
Centered in Japan.
You got people
40
from America,
nations.
France.
Yep. And then ECG used to be the
ECG stands for.
It used to be the Extreme No, it used to be the European Cosplay Gathering.
European Cosplay Gathering.
And then there were a bunch of us who annoyed.
Sounds like
the organizer in France.
Eurovision.
Yeah, we were like, hey, Australia's in Eurovision. Can we be in ECG? Can we? And they did it for 1 year. So I got to help revise the rules for the Australian round, and I got to judge the first Australian ECG round. And then our Team Australia went over and they came third.
Wow, that's big.
Which was huge. They did so well. And speaking of taking props overseas and traveling light, they made their set from their giant novelty props. So they got the giant novelty checks, and then they cut them up and made their set out of their giant novelty checks. Because they're light. They're made out of...
What set was this that they made?
So they did a Genshin Impact fight scene set in a forest, and so they had an illustrated background with snow and fire and creepy trees, and then in the foreground they had some creepy trees.
Because I guess, something for listeners to understand about these cosplay photo festivals. Well, this is not a photo festival. This is an actual
skit competition.
Tournament. Is that it's more than dressing up.
Yep.
It's much more than...
A skit competition is 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes. In Europe and Anglophone countries, in China and Taiwan and Hong Kong, it's a little bit different, and there's been some really interesting work on that. But for countries who have been influenced by things like the World Cosplay Summit, a skit competition is 2.5 to 3 minutes with props, and there are varying rules for the props. So World Cosplay Summit states that you can have 3 large set pieces weighing no more than 10 kilos, 2 meters and 10 centimeters by 2 meters and 10 centimeters by a meter.
And those restrictions are good,
those
right?
Restrictions
they've really stopped.
There's a reason for the rules. And one thing I really enjoy doing is reading through different cosplay event rules and going like, I wonder who did a dumb thing. Why is that rule there?
What are some dumb things that
I'll come back to that because I really want to get at what a cosplay skit is. So you have your 3 props. You're allowed to have as many handheld props as you can, and then in addition to making, beautiful costumes, often with quick changes or weapons or fight choreography, you'll have a voiceover and you'll have a fully animated backing video. And then in the case of World Cosplay Summit, they brought in 2021 that all of your audio has to be royalty-free, which means that you either need to find royalty-free sound effects and music, or you need to have somebody like my cosplay partner, Amy, who is a musician. And she scored Akira sounding, like music inspired by Akira, so that we could actually have that kind of gamelan, that iconic Akira music without having the iconic Akira music.
Gee, yeah, because that really ups the creative stakes in terms of if you can't just do that heavy leaning on, here's the John Williams score from Star Wars and I'm cosplaying as a stormtrooper, done. Instead, you've got to do something within the realms of avoiding copyright, but evoke that to be adjacent to.
So the modern competition cosplayer, if I think of somebody like Vampria and Vi, who represented us at ECG and came third, they had machine embroidery that they digitized, programmed, and then spent hundreds of hours and thousands of meters of thread using their programming their machines to embroider. They had 3D printed props, which is again CAD, and then printing the prop and then putting it together and then sanding off print lines and then finishing it so it looked like metal. They also had leather work. Vampria learnt how to cobble shoes. So your modern day cosplayer is somebody who is doing computer assisted design. Yes. They are fabricating things out of 3D printing. They are using embroidery machines. They are doing wig work. The current trend in wigs is to make a wig from scratch.
It's really remarkable.
It's insane. And now, the latest thing that people are learning is wigs from scratch and shoemaking.
And this is because you can't really get store-bought. For what you want.
It started off with you can't really get store-bought, and then your technical competitions usually have a baseline of 80% made by the wearer.
Right, it's also within the rules.
It's also within the rules, and then that goes up to something like 90% made by the wearer, and something like C2E2, which is the Crown Central Crown Cosplay Championships, and it takes place at Chicago. I think that's all the C's and the E's. But anyway, so World Cosplay Summit says that it's the biggest competition in the world because it has the most countries. C2E2 says that it's the biggest competition in the world because it has the most prize money.
Oh, well, you're in a right competition environment where there are two vying entities. Right? I mean, that says it's hot.
But if we're talking about ingenuity and the development that's happening, the winner of C2E2 last year is a guy from England. What is your name? I want to call it, because he like me uses his actual name for cosplay.
Right, that's a decision.
Which is a decision that we make. I followed him recently, so I should be able to find him.
Because many people would start this journey as a fan and with maybe a forum identity that's a avatar and a pseudonym.
And definitely in the 90s when we were going online, there was no way known you were using your actual name online.
Well, it's always a space that's already got nearly both feet in the fictional.
Yeah. Are we going back there, Craig? All right. I can't. I was on a podcast just after him. There we go. Cosplay Crunch podcast. Come on, Savage, save me. Anyway, this guy.
We'll put something in show notes.
Because he learnt how to electroplate foam.
So you've got foam and you're putting metal finish on top of it.
He was gold plating foam, which
How do you get it to bond?
has done.
I'm no chemist, but I imagine there's a bonding problem.
Matthew Barry is his name.
Really?
I was going to say, I want to call him Barry, but that was just his surname. He developed the process for electroplating.
Wow. So
foam.
we're talking Oppenheimer level.
We're talking cutting edge science being used in this hobby.
Yeah, because the story will be told down through the ages of, gee, how did we get this metal on the foam?
Yeah.
And it's like,
and it all comes down to this. And there's this really interesting fan archival work happening because we can trace it back to the reason that everybody makes their armor in a certain way is because of one tutorial that was put up in the 90s. And everybody does it that way.
Yeah.
Because that was so there are these real archival work. It's because everything in cosplay, like a lot of fandom areas, is so ephemeral. If we think of the sites that were up in the early 2000s, like Angel Fire's gone. So, nobody's keeping a record of this stuff. There's Cosplay in America set out, he was a photographer, and he's self-published 3 volumes of cosplay photography. And he's been archiving a lot of this stuff on Instagram. We're showing photos taken on film cameras from the early 2000s and earlier. But there's very few people doing this archival work.
And that matters because, in years to come, decades to come, in terms of how these past moments get referred to or have a bearing on the present, if there's no tangible lived experience that's documented there, it can just get forgotten. And
we've seen this in some places. So up until the pandemic, it got really popular to give out cosplay business cards or cos cards.
Right.
So you'd have your a cosplay photo on one side and then your information on the other side, and you'd go around and you give them out at conventions to kind of, like, if you had your photo taken by somebody, you'd give them your card so that they could find you again, and vice versa. If you were guesting and you didn't have merch, it was a really easy thing to give out.
Which is very old-fashioned, right?
Yeah,
it's very kind of pre-mobile phone.
Yeah, business card thing. That got completely forgotten, in the late 2010s, and it's slowly making a resurgence.
So how do people know who they've met? Without these cards.
Maybe there's instant TikTok follows. I don't know.
It is such a crisis, I find, in some ways, when you have so many advantages of a digital landscape, but websites disappear.
Disappear,
right?
yeah.
And if you've got it into some proprietary website provider, that proprietary website provider can also fall down.
Yep.
And it's I mean, I've forgotten.
And then if we're talking about cosplay, cosplays take up space. I'm very lucky that I have a partner who before I came back home from New Zealand, he and my dad dug out a hole underneath our house. So I literally have a hobbit hole,
like a bomb shelter vibe. Or a hobbit hole. So hobbit hole's much nicer.
Hobbit hole is much. There are chandeliers in there and bookcases and nice polished floating wood floors. It's quite nice. So they made a room for me to keep a lot of my stuff, and then there's stuff up at my parents' as well. So I'm really fortunate that I'm in a place where I can store nearly 20 years worth of costumes. But a lot of people, if you think cosplayers started off, they're 12, 13 years old. If they move out of home, they're not going to be able to take that stuff with them. Their first costumes are probably going to be either bought from Taobao or very poorly made, so they're not going to withstand anything. And then, if you're living in Melbourne at the moment and you're needing to move house every single year because you're renting and cosplay is the first thing to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a certain practicality that can confront the, again, the wonderful creative engagement in bringing the fictional into the real. Yet sometimes that real can also be
there's real consideration. So we're talking about imagined worlds and fantasy identities, and one thing that I rage against in cosplay studies is the assumption that all cosplayers are doing this to escape reality, because reality is so very present in everything that a cosplayer does.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm always reminded about there was one many years back, a forestry campaign here in Tasmania that I was told about, where they were using the ghost figures from Mononoke Hime,
Yep.
Anyway, these real politicization of fictional characters. So yeah, politics and costume.
Everything is political.
Yeah.
Every single thing is political. If we're talking about cosplay photo festivals, so we have the first one starting off in around 2018, 2019, there's 2 events in Europe. We have Pixelmania in Poland and Il Volta in Italy, I believe. And then we have a bunch of Australians who go along to that and a bunch of New Zealanders.
In Italy?
In Italy. So they went to the Poland event. In
Poland?
Yeah, so Pixelmania starts off in Poland and Italy, with Pixelmania in Poland and Il Volta in Italy. Il Volta is great because it's like these 4 like tiny medieval towns that come together, and they're just like, you pay us 20 euros, you get board, you get these castles to run around in, go take photos.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Right.
But yeah, we had a bunch of Australians to go up to that
Wow.
event. We get a bunch of New Zealanders to go up to that event, including, importantly, Little Noise Photography. She comes back and she's like, I could do this in Wellington.
Wow.
And
See-
that's how the Wellington Photo Fest starts.
Okay, so yes, okay, so bringing it back to the Wellington Photo Fest, it's very significant if we're talking about archiving. I mean, as someone from the outside, it seems like these photo festivals are also documenting moments in time.
Yep.
The costume as well as the locations that are there. So take us through what the Wellington Cosplay Photo Festival entails. Is there competition, or is it just his locations in a map and we can help facilitate?
Pretty
photo
much. It's 2 days of official shooting time, but
Well, so-
increase.
Yes, let's unpack that.
Yep.
What is official shooting time?
Official shooting
2 days.
time is when the event takes place, usually in around Waitangi Day weekend, and of course this is Waitangi Day, with all of the politicization of Te Tiriti of Waitangi
Yeah.
is going to be very big. But it's
And for people that don't know this is, obviously we've just come from Australia Day, Invasion Day
Yep.
conflict.
Yep.
Right. Does this speak to a same political tension?
So Te Tiriti has been held up and politicized as the model for treaty outside of New Zealand. Inside of New Zealand, it was a document that had a Maori, a Rail translation, and an English translation. The iwi, the Maori chiefs, signed the Maori version. The British dignitaries signed both the English version and the Maori version. And they were both chucked in a drawer for about 10 years and ignored until they could be rolled out and used to make laws that were useful for the white colonizers. But what is in the principles of this treaty is ownership and governance for the Maori people, and an agreement between iwi and their representatives and the Crown. So it goes above New Zealand Parliament, it goes above the British Parliament, and it's an agreement between equals. It's an agreement between chiefs. And as I understand it, the current movement that is meant to make it fairer, according to a bunch of white Pakeha suit bros, because it's unfair to the white people.
So we have this very political moment.
Yep.
And there's going to be
a bunch of cosplayers running around. So you have 2 days. You have an assigned. You have one assigned photo. If you're a cosplayer, you have one assigned photo shoot with a photographer, and then if you want to do more shoots, you can arrange them yourselves. And there's this year it's a Facebook group and a series of messenger groups where people can kind of say, I am going as this character.
right.
Does anybody want to shoot with me? Or, hey, I've got an idea for a group from this particular franchise. Who else has these costumes? So what's really cool is it then becomes a record of what is trending and what is iconic to the space. So with it being in Wellington, and with so much of the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as well being shot actually in Wellington, so there's a park on the town belt, which is where scenes like the first time that we see the Nazgul after the hobbits go hunting for mushrooms, and it's the whole "get off the road, Mr. Frodo" moment.
Yeah.
You can go to that park, you can stand in that tree, you can crawl in that stump and do your
Yes.
Hobbit photo shoot. And so there's been many of those. So Wellington Photo Fest started in...
So there is Lord of the Rings cosplay that
always
you're
the Lord of the
anticipating
Rings.
seeing.
I would
that are
expect
always
Lord of the
there.
Rings
Right,
cosplay. So I think they had their first event in February 2019, and then I went over in February 2020, just before everything
Right,
changed.
COVID, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like looking back, it's so surreal.
It's like a different world.
Yeah.
Right? This naive...
And we'd been in Japan in November beforehand, and there was already murmurs of illness of something. Right. I had friends in the States at the end of 2019 as well, when it was first.
And, who knows what we're about to
Who
lose,
knows
but at
what's
that
about to
stage,
happen? Yeah.
It's people from around the world
Yep.
coming to Wellington, and there was...
For 2 days to take photos.
And we were talking here about it can be a great insight as someone participating as well as looking at it to see trends.
Yep. So what's popular in anime, what's popular in gaming. So in New Zealand, when I first went there, I noticed that there was less skits and there was much more technical. And also there was a lot of WoW cosplay then. So it was much more about...
World of Warcraft, really?
Yeah, huge World of Warcraft builds. Lots of armor, lots of very technical builds.
Really?
And the attitude then was that anime was for kids. Nobody did anime costumes. And I'm like wandering around in my Kushana from Valley of the Wind, like Ghibli costumes, being like, oh... Like, cause I walked in, I won prizes in Australia. Like I entered a competition. I'm like, yeah, I'm totally going to win in my half-assed.
Sure, yeah. Wow.
I'm just in New Zealand. I don't have to try hard. I'm totally going to win. No.
You got to start.
No. Absolutely got. I mean, at the end, I had such a good time in this competition, the only competition that I entered in New Zealand. Met some great people, spent a lot of time drooling over some really beautiful WoW costumes, really beautiful Witcher costumes.
But I mean, that point you point. I mean, there's a certain kind of, is it a cultural cringe? I mean, well, a kind of one-upmanship from Australia to New Zealand, where New Zealand is seen as the second cousin, the kind of
and I did not realize how much I had internalized that until I lined up for that competition, and I'm like,
And what's fascinating here is that all the stories seem to suggest that actually New Zealand is a centre in this. I mean, in terms of, if you're a professional film set person, you're not going to get into this competition. I mean, there's
a level of professionalism to do with costuming that, and I think in the arts as well. There's a really big drag movement in New Zealand at the moment. Really big drag king movement in New Zealand at the moment, which we don't have.
Drag king. What is drag?
What is a drag?
King?
What is a drag king? It's so. If we're talking about drag, if we're talking about drag queens, everybody I'm sure is familiar with things like your RuPaul's Drag Race, which for the longest time did not have kings or trans contestants. But they, I think Drag Race UK had a king in it. So a king is somebody who is AFAB, who cross-dresses. And sometimes they are trans, sometimes they're non-binary, sometimes in the same way that with AMAB drag queens, we have the full gamut of people for whom it's their identity, people for whom it's an interest, people for whom it's it's linked to their sexuality, people for whom it's their gender identity. The same thing with kinging.
And I mean, I mean, again, getting to the point that it's not just escapism; it is wrapped up with identity profoundly as you're engaging in these cosplay spaces. I've just looked at the time.
No,
we're nearly at 5 o'clock.
I would believe that. We should not be. We should not be left alone.
So
we have 4 minutes to wrap it up.
6 segments of my questions. We've just done part 1 of segment 1.
There we go.
Okay. So I did want to get around to future things, right?
Future things.
You blew my mind before we went on air talking about Icon.
Right. So Icon. So In the same way that Little Noise Photography went to Pixelmania and brought photo festivals to New Zealand,
Yes.
I went to Wellington Cosplay Festival in 2020. Wellington is very much like Hobart. So we have arts, we have mountains, we have lots of water, we have good food, we have good air. We have a very narrow town belt in between hills and water, and that's what Wellington has. So I'm like, we could totally do this here.
And you're thinking locations.
I'm thinking locations. I'm thinking what's possible. So Utah's Communities for the past 3 years, this will be our 4th year in September, has sponsored the event. So they give us a hub. So we're based around the Sandy Bay campus. So we have an opening event. We also have a repair station and like a little hangout station.
Right.
And there's also a lot of photos that get taken on campus.
And this is for people wanting to cosplay.
So we attract
And
cosplayers
photo.
and photographers.
Yep.
So there's no competition, there's no vendors, there's no sales, there's no screenings. It's very much pared down to a cosplay and photographer experience, and it's really interesting to see these events happen. It's the only cosplay photo festival in Australia. We've been getting a lot of photo walks in places like Adelaide and Melbourne, which is very cool.
What is a photo walk?
So a photo walk is where you get, we see the Hobart Photography Society used to organise photo walks. You take your camera, you get a bunch of people, you go take some
Right.
photos of things.
Yep.
And
Here's a graveyard. We're going to take some photos
and
of
it's
the
usually
headstones.
really
Here's a-
collaborative and collegial. So if you've got a problem, if like you've got a new bit of kit,
Yep.
you don't know how to use it, somebody's going to show you how to use it, and it's really cool. Cosplay photo walk, there will usually be 2 or 3 models as well, and so that models or cosplayers, so that you can take photos of the cosplayer. So in those events,
So is that targeted towards photographers?
so
Being able to
it's
develop
targeted
skill?
more at photographers.
Yep.
And a lot of the world of cosplay photography is aimed at the photographer, and it's very gendered, and there's a lot that we can talk about the fact that all of our photography terms come from hunting terms.
Right.
So we talk about shooting, we talk about sniping, we talk about
What's a sniping action?
a
for
snipe.
photographer?
So if you set up a shot and you're all ready to go and you've worked with your subject and you've got it just perfect, and then somebody else comes along and just takes the same photo,
Oh, right.
but they haven't done
Like,
any of the
just
work.
by your shoulder, and
Yeah,
then suddenly
they're just like,
sniped. Right.
and it's rude.
Really?
It's incredibly rude.
Right. So it's actually quite a statement
it's
of breaking protocol.
Yeah, so that's happening in September. As far as Japanese events that are coming up,
Okay, so hold on. So there's going to be a local event here in Hobart,
Okay,
Tasmania,
yep.
happening in September. We will get you back before September.
Yep.
To get people locally excited. It's going to be open to the world though, so people will be
Yeah, so there's an application process that usually opens about mid-year.
Right,
For
so we're
cosplayers and
in
photographers.
February
We're
from
in,
tomorrow.
We're in February from tomorrow.
End of January, right? So this is still 3 months away.
Yeah,
or so?
we're still
3-4
a
months
little
away?
bit out
Yep.
from it. But yeah, there's some cool things that are happening. So I'm really excited to be working with the Australia Japan Society again this year.
And is that going to culminate in anything?
I mean,
we'll culminate in a ton.
I have
Public
plans.
stuff happening?
I'm very hopeful that it will lead to some cool partnerships for me. But it's Wooden Boat Festival is about to start, and the Umitaka Maru is back for the first time. So if you like Japanese stuff and you like boaty boats and you like the idea of going and seeing some handsome seamen and a boaty boat, you can go.
What is the Mitaka Maru?
The Umitaka Maru.
Maru is...
I believe, and I'm not. I should look at the Australia Japan Society Tasmania Facebook and website, but I believe it's a research vessel. So they're in town to do research, but yeah, they also very generously. Each year they used to come down before COVID, and they very generously open up the ship so that people can walk through and see what a research vessel looks like.
Actually get to go on that one year.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Right, that was then the boat I went on. Great.
Yeah, and then this is the first time that they've been back since.
Interesting politics,
Yeah, again,
whaling,
everything is
science.
politics.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And particularly a Japanese research vessel
I
in
know.
Hobart waters.
That codes signified. Sorry, I had Ashley in a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Signified. Japanese research vessel.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
it's politics is all about the signifiers and the signified.
So we've got that. We've got you're taking me down more tangents here, Emerald. You're off to Wellington.
Off to Wellington.
Check. I mean, if people are interested in the Wellington photo cosplay opportunity, obviously it's a bit too late to join it. But you can go online and see some of the results of it. Does anything publicly happen?
Each year, Wellington Cosplay Photo Festival, they publish a gallery, and then all the photographers and the cosplayers will publish the photos across their social media.
And it can be a great little insight into what's trending.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, are the Spartans still happening? Are the people... I imagine it is summer.
It's been a while since I've seen a mass group of Spartans.
That's an interesting example, isn't it? They would have peaked and then dissipated. Are there Barbies there, right? I mean, that was one that was like 2 or 3 years back. Does that have legs?
I haven't seen any Barbies planned. I think what happens, because it's Wellington, it's very heavily fantasy.
Right.
So there's going to be lots of Critical Role, lots of TTRPG.
And there we can see the influence of Netflix funding certain projects within that space, or streaming services more broadly.
Yeah. And then we could go into what happens when
Squid Games.
Squid Games?
Is that a bit too mainstream, right? Squid Games, people dressed as the...
No, I mean, Squid Games is definitely... God, they set up a real-life Squid Games in Sydney a couple of years ago. Did you know? They had, like, the doll, and they hired actors and cosplayers to go and wear the suits. So before
there's a bit of alternate
Mr.
reality
Beast
game.
did his actual grim... thing, insert chosen adjective. They did a promotion in Sydney with the doll and photo ops, and I don't think people really quite thought through the optics of that.
Yeah. The actual gambling death vibe.
Yeah.
So it'd be fascinating. So are you anticipating to see some trends there already? Like, are you expecting to see? Like you're just saying, it's going to be mainly fantasy, so you might have some old school Lord of the Rings, Warhammer 40K. I mean, there's hype around a project around the corner. Marvel.
Is that actually happening, or is that been
Henry Cavill? Those attached, right? I mean,
I think. I mean, his partner's just produced a baby, and I'm sick of people saying that he's had a baby. Like, I'd like to see Henry Cavill push out a child.
Amen. Marvel superhero, the superhero thing, is that
I think there's been, again, because everything is political, we have cosplayers who are very conscious about the state of the world in Palestine, and Marvel and Disney are very pro-Israel and very Zionist. So there have been lots of moves to boycott, and you've got to think that the next Marvel movie has Gal Gadot playing a Zionist character. Canon Zionist.
Right. Oh.
That's your next episode.
It's 5:04. Let's keep going.
That's your next episode.
Wow, all right. I need to do my homework on that one.
Yeah.
What? So, other big fantasy things that might be there at Wellington?
I would say that there'd be some Dunmeshi, so Dungeon Meshi.
Oh, right.
Which is huge.
This is the cooking,
the cooking. But again, it's tabletop. It's
really
it's
right. Yeah.
It's based on D&D, which D&D in Japan. Like fantasy anime in Japan starts with Legends of Lodoss Wars, which is the manga version of one dude's D&D campaign, and it's because of Lodoss Wars that we think of elves as having pointy ears.
No kidding. Is that where...
Yeah.
So it wasn't Tolkien elves?
Doesn't describe it the way that we envision it.
Wow.
And
Deedlit, right? That's the character?
It's Deedlit. I made that claim at the first Tolkien moot in Australia a couple of years ago.
See,
because at heart, I'm a Tolkien nerd.
That's why I've got you on. Yeah, hardcore theory bombshells.
I mean, you were mentioning Zizek before we got on the show. I was going to talk about Deleuze and Mimesis, but I don't think we have time for that. Such a shame.
Damn, I just don't want this to end. But all right, I concede to you that it's Friday.
It is Friday.
5:06. People possibly want to listen to some
Join Craig next week on the Media Mothership, where he goes down the deep dive of Marvel and Zionism.
Actually, you know what the crazy thing is I've lined up for next week?
What?
It's understanding Donald Trump through WWE.
Oh! Wow. And well, no, that's really good because topical, and also there's been some really good Netflix docos come out lately.
Yeah. What's the Dumpu, the Japanese female wrestler autobiography?
There's a Japanese female autobiography. There's
the
history of the whole thing.
Vince McMahon
docos.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta go and
there's
see that.
some stuff on kind of like wrestling in the backwoods in the States.
Look, yeah, I never really paid much. Like as a kid, I watched a bit of WWF, Hulk Hogan and stuff, and then I completely ignored it. And
in my defense, I've been sewing very, very. I've been sewing for Wellington Cosplay Photo. It sounds like all I do is spend my time watching Netflix. I've been sewing, so I have Netflix on in the background.
You've been multitasking. You've actually been really taxing
and lesson planning as well, because semester's about to kick off. Come study Japanese with me. You'll have fun.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So if you're keen to expand your education, you can find out more about Emerald from searching Emerald King on UTAS.
So Emerald King UTAS for UTAS. You can see what I'm teaching this year, and you can also see the amazing work that my students are doing, like Ashley, who's been on recently. But then everything else, it is my legal name, Emerald L King, across my website, Instagram. And I think I have shuttered my Shitter account, but I am on Blue Sky. Not that I use it.
Yeah, there really hasn't. Yeah, there'll be a viable.
How else do you pronounce the X?
Look, it's really interesting. I was reading some articles today at ABC News, and Twitter is still featured as a source of information because it is such shorthand. If you want a quick quote from someone that's reacting to something, inevitably it's still exposed. So yeah, sadly, it seems to have integrated. I know with journalism, it's fascinating that Twitter was one of these kind of breakthrough spaces which people refer to the.
But I think. Again,
Bin Laden assassination broke on Twitter, right?
Yep.
So, it's just now such a regretful platform to engage in.
Ephemeral, because nobody has Twitter logs. It's all disappeared. And
this is why these news articles matter, right? They'll do screen captures, they'll put it in the news article.
No, they don't. They've never done screen caps. They've always done cross posts. So if you go back and read those articles that had cross posts, they disappeared. They did links.
Right. If they've linked it through a HTML code or something.
So if they reference a tweet, and that tweet's gone, that information is lost.
That's why I always
people didn't screen cap.
Right. Really?
Yeah. People need to screen cap your lecture notes, your crush, your ex-girlfriend that you're stalking. Don't stalk people. Screen cap. Screen cap, thanks.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. If it's just a link. Wow. Emerald, thank you so much. So much to digest here. So, we're going to play music now to help the rest of Hobart digest the last hour. Keep listening. And, if you want to get some show notes, I'll put some links up on the internet so you can check out my podcast or YouTube. I'll have links to some of the stuff Emerald's mentioned. And, thanks so much for coming on, Emerald.
Yeah, I will threaten to come back later on in the year.
We look forward to having you on.